Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis. I'm from Autodesk, and today I'm going to be talking about how to create HVAC type parts where we want to unfold this flat, but you'll notice that we're transitioning from, for example, from a rectangle to a circle. And if I switch into a sheet metal really quick, you'll see that sure enough we can actually unfold these and lay them flat. So I'm going to show how we're going to go about creating this type of part. Now before I get started, I wanted to let you know, so we're having a live stream next week. My buddy Wayne will be presenting about some of the enhancements in the manufacturing extension, so he's going to be talking about that. But then we're going to be gone for a couple weeks. So I'm actually traveling next week. That's why Wayne's doing next week's presentation. And then I'll be at AU and then Thanksgiving week. So next week will probably be the last live stream for the month of November. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you'll be alerted on upcoming live streams. But we'll start up again in December. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Okay, so let's jump in. In fact, I think Wayne's going to be on the keyboard for me today. Aaron was pretty busy with customers, so Wayne said he'd help me out. But he's actually on a call with a customer right now, so he'll hop on here in a little bit. So, okay, so what I want to do is to create a part like this, we need to transition from a rectangle to a circular shape. And to do that, we kind of need to deform the metal in the corners. And I'm going to be showing how we go about doing this. Now, I could do something like this starting with just a regular flat sheet metal part and adding bends, etc. But that would be very, very difficult. And it would take quite some time. So instead, we're going to kind of build the basic shape, and then I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to build this shape and one of our new commands in sheet metal, which is convert to sheet metal. So we're actually going to create this as a model instead of as a sheet metal part, and at the end, we'll go ahead and convert it. Okay, this will make sense as we go through, I hope. So I'm going to make sure I'm in inches right now. I'll go ahead and create a sketch, and you'll notice I'm actually in solid. I'm not even in the sheet metal tab. So I'm going to start with a rectangle. I like to use the center rectangle. So I'll click on center rectangle. And let's just make this like a 4x6. Oops, I hit my 3D mouse there. So basically making it a 4x6 rectangle. I'll go ahead and finish my sketch. And then I want to create the round portion up at the top. So to do that, we need to create a construction offset plane. So I'll go ahead and click on this little plane right here. Start to drag up, and let's just go maybe, I'll just say maybe like 5 inches in this case. And what we just did is we created a construction plane that's 5 inches off of that other sketch. I can now click on that construction plane, I'll right mouse click, and it shows me the commands that I can do. And I'm going to use this create sketch. So my piece of paper is actually floating up above that other rectangle. You can kind of see that if I rotate. Okay, I'll go ahead and create my circle. I'm going to kind of just line it up with the center here and just kind of put it somewhere there. Let's just say 1.5 for the size in this case. And I can put this wherever I want in here, but I'm going to purposely leave it right about here. That way we have basically 4 different angular faces to create this. I'll say finish sketch. Okay. So the commands that we're going to use is we're going to loft. So if I come in here and say loft, in fact, you'll notice the image kind of gives it away. It goes from one shape to another. But here's the catch. You have to have like equal number of points. In fact, you can kind of see it in the preview. If I hover over it, it goes away. You can kind of see there's 4 dots on that circle. Okay, so here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, but here I only have 1. So I'm going to need to make some changes to this to use the Loft command. The second thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to need to break the rectangle. I'm going to have to kind of round over the corners and then basically break it into a couple different segments, and we're going to loft those segments as individual faces. You can kind of see I'm selecting them here. And this is where the tips and tricks really kind of come into play. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my first sketch, and let's go ahead and let me go ahead and fillet the corner here. So I'm just going to use the 2D fillet command, this right here. So I can select that edge and that edge. And then it's asking for a size. I'm going to do something fairly small. Let's just do maybe like 0.125. And I'm going to do that on all 4 corners. Okay. Now, as I was practicing this and trying things out, you can use the mirror command and kind of speed things up. But I find that sometimes the mirror command can be a little bit touchy. And so I'm going to actually do everything on each corner just to make sure I'm getting the exact results that I want. Okay, if I zoom up on this corner, we can now see that we have this rounded section here. And I need to split this or break it into a couple different steps because we basically need to kind of fold our sheet metal like I showed. If I zoom up here, you can kind of see how it's folded into a couple different steps. So I'm not saying this is the perfect way of doing it, but I thought of a cool way of making exact steps here, and that is to actually use the Polygon command. And check this out. I'm going to use circumscribed polygon. Okay. Then I'm going to change to this option to construction, because I want to make sure I'm not creating like object lines. I'm kind of just using this for reference. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that construction option, and now anything that I draw will be in construction. And check this out. As I start to move, you can see that it's going to create a circle with, in this case, 6 edges circumscribed around it. And you can see that they're construction lines. So I'm going to go ahead and change from 6 to 12. And you can kind of now see how there's more lines. And then all I'm going to do is kind of come down here, and you can kind of see it snap to the end of my horizontal line and the beginning of my curve. Okay? So you can kind of see I picked the center point of my fillet, and then I'm just going to click right there. And let's zoom up and see what happened. So it created this construction line polygon for me, and now these lines are intersecting there and there. So I basically have 3 segments. I have one segment that goes from here to here, one segment that goes from here to here, and another segment that goes up to here. But you'll notice that this is all one line right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to use, under Modify, there's a command in here called Break. And it basically breaks the object until the next, transition or intersection, whatever you want to call it. So watch what happens when I do this. I'm going to say Break, and I'm just going to hover over this curve, and you'll see a red X appear right there. Okay? So what it's basically saying is I can take this segment and break it where it intersects or where it touches right there. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and now you'll notice that this little segment, it might be kind of hard to see, is only from here back to the starting point. So we just broke that arc. Now same thing if I come over here. You can kind of see as I hover over it, it's one big arc that goes from here all the way up. But as I hover over it, it's going to break at that point. Now, unfortunately, it also broke it right here, but that's okay. We can deal with that. And then you'll notice that this segment is only from here to here. So again, I'm not saying this is the way you have to do it. I just thought this was a quick way of creating a polygon. Instead of maybe, I could have done some angular lines and rotated them every 25 degrees or something like that. But here I just used existing geometry, this polygon geometry, to break that corner. So a little repetitive. I'm going to do the exact same thing a little bit faster this time in this upper right corner. So I'll say polygon, circumscribe polygon. Make sure my construction is checked, which it is. And you'll notice it only has 6 edges. So here's another tip. If you didn't know this, I could type in 12, but if I click this little down arrow, it remembers the last numbers that I've used. So the last number I used was 12, so I don't even have to type it in. Oops, I was a little bit off on that one, so I'm gonna make sure I do that correctly. So circumscribe that, I'll click. Again, using this little down arrow, I'll say 12, and then make sure I move straight up. Then, once again, I'll just say break, and it's gonna break at those little red X's. And there we go. I now have 3 separate segments. So you can kind of see I've got this one segment right there, I've got this segment right here, and then I've got this segment right there. Okay, now like I said, I could probably mirror this, but I just want to make sure that everything is exact, especially when I'm using my Loft command. So I'm just going to recreate this in each corner. And it goes pretty quick once you kind of get the idea of what you need to do. So I'm just going to break and break, call that good, and then come down here and do one last one real quick. So I'll do my polygon. Excuse me. I'll click there and click down there. Okay. Unfortunately, it looks like Wayne is having issues getting logged in, so there might not be any answers on your chat until the end. I'll try and take some time to review those. I apologize. So let's come in here and break. A lot of my coworkers are at the SEMA show in Las Vegas this week, so we've been pretty crazy busy. Okay, so I've done all 4 corners. I kind of need to do the same thing up here. So I'm going to edit that sketch, and this will actually go a little bit quicker. But I'm going to draw some lines that go straight across, like so, and maybe a line that goes up and down, like this. Okay, just for reference. And shortcut, I can select it and hit the X, like an X-ray, on my keyboard, and it'll turn it into a construction line. So you can kind of see just hitting X on your keyboard, instead of having to go over and select it from the sketch palette. Okay, so this is all one object. Well, I can come in and do the exact same thing. I'll do my polygon, circumscribe polygon. I'll set the edges to 12. And let's just go up to the top, for example. Now here's a mistake I just made. You'll notice that it came in as object lines, and I really want those to be construction lines, so I'm going to do that again, but make sure I hit construction this time. Okay, so there we go. We can see it looks like construction. I'll go to the top, and then I'm going to split or break all of these segments. So here you can really kind of see it's going to go from there to there, and then it's going to break to that segment there. So I'm just going to kind of walk around and just click on all of these. And like I said, I think this is a pretty fast way of doing it. I could have used angular lines to kind of define all those points, but now you can see I've got a whole bunch of separate segments. Okay, now I'm ready to start building this thing. So to go from one shape to another, we're going to use the Loft command. And under Surface, so I click on my little Surface tab right here. Under Create, you'll see we have Loft. Okay? And it's going to ask to go from one profile to another. So I'm going to zoom up, and let's just click this first circular segment right here. So I'm going to click on that guy. And then I'll zoom up here. And you can see I can click on, and I need to be careful. You'll notice it allows me to click a point. I want to click on that edge and watch what it does. It'll take that small radius and loft it up to this taller radius up here. And again, it's going to be just repeat. Now you'll notice when I said OK, my sketches went away. I'll just expand those open, turn them on. And let's just use the Loft command. So I'm going to do the exact, oops, a little too close. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now here's what I was talking about. You'll notice that it's actually split into two separate segments. So let's say I accidentally just clicked that one segment, and then I came up here and we'll click this other segment. You'll see that sure enough, it'll loft between the two. But I want to make sure that I select all three of those. So you can kind of see now it's going to grow between those. And we have a nice small to large transition. I'll do the same thing again, making sure I click the little arc. We're actually going to click to the point here in a little bit. Whoops, a little zoomy, sorry. Okay, so I've just created this corner. You can kind of see how it's angled back a little bit to the circle because the circle kind of sits back a little bit. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing. Like I said, unfortunately, this is going to be pretty repetitive. And let me just kind of zoom up here, grab that arc there. Now you'll notice this time it leaves an opening, and we're going to come back to that here in just a moment. But I'm going to repeat my last command, and again, I hope you all know this. If I right mouse click, I get this marking menu, and you'll notice this blue radar and this black line. Well, this is what we call a gesture. And so if I were to right click and drag straight up, it's going to repeat my last command. If I were to drag to the left, it would do an undo. Okay? So for example, I'm not in any command right now. And if I just right click and drag straight up, you'll see that it repeated the Loft command. It's a real fast way of running the same command that you just did over and over again. Okay, so you'll see me use it quite a bit as we're doing this. So I'm going to make sure I grab that little segment there and that little segment there. I'll say OK, drag straight up, grab that segment and that arc there. Okay, so now you can see that we've built basically one side of this, and this is what we call a surface. There's no thickness to this whatsoever. It's almost like a piece of paper. Okay. Now I'm going to use the Loft command again, but this time I'm going to pick on this straight edge right here. And if I zoom up, you'll notice I can go to edges, etc., or I can go to a point. So I'm just going to click on that point, and you can see that it's going to loft from that edge up to that point, and we've basically kind of sealed the back or the side of our part there. Okay, so again, let me just quickly generate these lofts for you. And the cool thing about this project, this is something you can do. I don't need to attach a file or anything like that. You can build this yourself using the dimensions that I used. I just did a 4x6 and I think 1.5 inches for the circle. Okay, let me make sure I get the curve and that segment there. Say OK. I'll drag straight up to repeat my Loft command and finish. Whoops, a little too far. I'll do this guy and this guy up here. I'll say OK. And I'll come down, make sure I grab all that which looks good, and then I'll do one last one here. And then we can kind of join everything together. So again, like I said, a little bit of upfront time to do this. And again, we're just trying to simulate how this is going to work. Okay, so I'll use the Loft command just to fill in these other places, I'm going to go ahead and click there and there. In fact, you know what? I might even turn off my sketches. Actually, that top sketch I'll turn off, just so it's not in the way. I'll use my loft and I'll click there, and yeah, so notice it's not catching to a point, it's trying to catch to an edge. So I do have to have that sketch turned on to catch to that particular point. So let me go ahead and do this guy and that guy, and then finally I'll do this back edge and that point right there. Okay, so we now have this shape, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my sketches. I don't need those anymore. But you'll notice that it's hollow and it's thin walled. And if I were to expand open my bodies, you'll notice that these are all individual faces. We have a whole bunch of them. Looks like 16 faces. Okay, I want these to be all one face. So I'm going to come in here and use the stitch command. I want to stitch these faces together. So I can say stitch, and you'll notice it allows me to click one face, and then I can click another face, and you'll see that green line kind of highlights, and that shows that that's a valid stitch. If I were to say okay, those were stitched together. So you can see body one went away, right? And it's right there as two faces that were stitched together. I'm going to undo back. Okay, so we basically need to stitch all of these together. They're individual pieces of fabric, and if we wanted to join them together, we'd sew them or stitch them together. So I'm going to say stitch, and I'm just going to do a crossing window. Now notice what it looks like. It's yellow and dashed. And that's because I went from right to left. If I went from left to right, you'll notice it's a selection window. It'll only select whatever's inside that window. But if I go this way, it's going to select anything that's inside it and anything that it crosses. So you can see that I was able to select all of those faces, those bodies. I'll say okay, and now it is stitched into one. And for some reason, I'm not sure why. Sometimes the stitch does that where it gets rid of my line. So I might have to do this one at a time. Let me just try this really quick. I apologize, guys. Let me make sure. Yeah, I don't know. Man, I do not know why it's doing that. It worked perfectly in my multiple times I tried this out, and every once in a while it would get rid of those lines, and I'm not 100% sure why. It could be because of my tolerance or something like that. Let me try making my tolerance go really small and see if I get, no. Let me try that again. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If it doesn't work, I'm just going to keep moving forward. Not 100% sure why it does that to me sometimes. Let me say okay. Yeah, so it's not going to do it. I don't know why, guys. And it might have been because of the sketch. And this is exactly the reason why I said I don't like to use mirror, because I want to make sure everything worked correctly, and sure enough it did not. So there we go, right? Okay, I'll just do a small transition. I'll stitch these together. It'll still work, but the flat layout will look a little bit different. So I might have maybe not caught to the right point or something. We'll see. Okay, so now I have this one body. And what I can do is come in here and say thicken. I want to give it some thickness now. So what are the faces? I'm going to go ahead and click on that one face. And I can specify a distance. So you can kind of see as I start to drag, it gives me some thickness there, right? So you can kind of see that. Well, I want to go, let's just say 0.05. And right now it's going into the part. Maybe I want it to go the other direction, so I'm going to say minus 0.05. So that way the inside stays, 4 by 6, for example, and the inside of the circle stays 1.5. So we're adding material to the outside. Now I'm giving it a distance of 0.05. Now this isn't a rule, like a sheet metal rule. You'll see that here in a moment. but I am giving it an equal thickness. So I'll go ahead and say OK. And now we actually have a physical body. Okay. We still have, you can see we have our surface that we used, but it's now thickened into its own body. Okay. What we're going to do now is if I were to try and unfold this, there's nothing to unfold to. We need to basically create a rip through the part because it's going to be laid out flat, and then it's going to be bent and folded together, and maybe it's going to be welded along that rip. So I'm going to just physically machine a rip into here. So I'm going to create a sketch, and I'll just do it maybe like on this front face right here. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle. I don't really care what size right now. I'm just going to do something like that. Actually, I lied. I do care about what size. Let me go like this. And I'm going to tab over, and I'm going to make the gap thickness basically the same thickness as my material. So I'm going to say 0.05. And then I'll go ahead and click. So I don't care about the height of it, but I did care about the width. I want it to be 0.05. And then what I can do is I also want it to be centered. So I'm going to use a constraint. I'll use my midpoint constraint, and I'll say I want that line centered on that point. And you can see how it moved it up. It's perfectly centered, and it's the correct thickness. Okay, now when I said OK, it looks like it went away. And I get this question quite often. I create a sketch and it went away. Well, notice I had turned off my sketches. The eyeball is crossed out. Well, if I click on that, it'll turn my sketches back on. And I can turn whichever sketches I want on. So just this guy. Whoops, way too far. Let's go ahead and extrude this. Now you'll notice where it's sitting. I can extrude this direction, but I need to go in two different directions, two different distances. So I'm going to change from one side to two sides. And what this does is it brings up another arrow, and I can drag a particular distance in that direction. So I'm basically making sure I'm cutting all the way through the front sheet metal face. You can kind of see that here. I'll say OK, and we now have a rip that goes down through the part. You can kind of see as I rotate how that looks like it's going down through the part. Okay, here's where the magic happens. Now I want to turn this into a sheet metal part. So I'm going to go over here to sheet metal, say create, convert to sheet metal. Okay. What's the source? I just have to click on this. Now you'll notice a couple things happen here. What it does is it detects the thickness of this object, and it says that it detected it's 0.05 inches thick. Then it brings up my library and it tries to find an existing material that has that thickness. Now unfortunately none of these do. You can see I've got 0.125, 0.0625 or whatever. And so you'll see it says note thickness will be changed to 0.05. So I can come in here and say, is it stainless steel? Is it aluminum? Is it steel? So in this case I'm going to say aluminum. So I'm just going to click on aluminum. And right here it'll say thickness will be changed to 0.05. Now here it's kind of grayed out, but it's really cool. I should have picked the thickness that I already had, like 0.0625. But when you actually, for example, if this is 0.0625, it would find it in my library and it would select that automatically for me. It's really kind of slick. So all I had to do was click on it and say what material, whether it's aluminum or stainless or steel. I'll say OK. And now notice the icon for the body. Looks like a folded sheet metal part. Okay. Also notice that we now have a rule called aluminum, and it says convert. And the reason it says convert is because it figured it out from the model. In fact, if I were to view this rule, we can come in here and verify that sure enough it's 0.05 thick. Okay? Okay, so it says it's a sheet metal part. Well, let's see if it is. So I'm going to come in here and say unfold. I'll just click on a flat face and notice it actually unfolds it. I'll say okay. And like I said, I was hoping to see the edges over here. So we'll pretend these are rolled and these are more kind of bent or whatever. But you can see that it actually creates the correct shape here. I could cut this out on a water jet or a laser or plasma, whatever, and fold it. So I'll come back and say refold faces. So the key thing here that I wanted to show was that you can start with a model that isn't even a sheet metal part. In this case, we used Loft, and we kind of went from one shape to another. But you could even start with like a soccer ball shape, right? With all those flat faces, and then you would have to make sure you have an opening in there somewhere, and you could unfold that to a flat sheet metal part. Okay, so let's take this kind of to the next level. I want to create some flanges that come down off of this that maybe will help attach it to a rectangular ductwork, for example. So I'm going to just kind of zoom up on here. I'm just going to click on this front edge, right mouse click, and you'll notice it says flange. Okay, so again, this is that marking menu thing I was telling you about. I could just drag down to the right and it's going to run the flange command. So as you get more proficient with the product, when you start knowing where these are at, like press pull is at 2 o'clock, you could just right click and drag to press pull at 2 o'clock. Okay. Okay. So I'm in the flange command, and notice if I start to drag this, it's going to, bend that for me at 90 degrees. Okay. However, I want it to go straight down. Well, what is straight down? If I look at it from the side, I could rotate this and try and get close. I might have to zoom up here, but I want to be exact. Okay. Now that looks close, but if we zoom up here, you can kind of see it's at an angle. So how would I figure out what that should be? Okay, so I'm going to show you. Oops, hello, fit. Sorry, I rotated way out of space. I'll show you a neat tip. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that edge, do my flange. I like to start to drag just so I can kind of see what it looks like. Okay, then. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and start to rotate it just so it's going kind of in the right direction, something like that. What I want to figure out is what is the angle between that angled face and a flat face. Well, you'll notice I don't have a flat face on this design. So check this out. I'm going to, under angle, I'm going to click on this little down arrow and I'm going to say measure. Okay, and you can see my cursor has a little ruler. So I'm going to click in my screen, and what this is going to allow me to do is then select things. Okay, so I'm going to click on that face there, and then I want to measure it against something flat. Well, I could turn on my origin, and there's my origin, so I can measure the angle from this blue face to that face there, and you can see that it actually changed my result. And it says it's 25.49 degrees. Well, that's going in that direction. Let me change that to a negative 25. And now we can see that sure enough, it's going in the correct direction. Okay, I'm going to do that again. I know that was kind of lengthy and talky there. So I'll do the same thing right here. Okay, I want to know that direction. So I'm going to turn my origin on so you can kind of see it. I'll say flange. I'll start to drag. What's my angle? So I'm going to click that little down arrow next to the angle, and instead of typing in something, now I could use the last one, which I should, but I'm going to say measure. And you notice what I said earlier when I said click in the screen, because like right now if I click, nothing happens. And now that I've clicked, it allows me to select something. So I'm not sure why we require you to do that, but basically you're saying, okay, I'm going to measure. So I'm going to measure that to that, and it figured out the angle, but it's going the wrong direction, so I'm going to go in the opposite direction, the negative direction. Okay? Now how far down do I need to go? Well, I can start dragging this, and I can actually click on an existing flange, and you'll see that it looks a little bit longer than that guy. Okay? So I snagged it to that point. Well, the reason is for this height datum, and I have a really cool live stream all about sheet metal, what the height datum and bend positions mean. But if I go to outer faces, you'll see that that lines up. Okay. In fact, I'm going to make this an even height. Let's just go 0.5. And I'm going to do the same thing for this one because I don't think I paid attention. I'll say 0.5. I'll do outer faces on that. Say okay. Yeah, there we go. So now they're the same height. Okay. So same thing. Now this is a different angle. So I'll click on that edge, flange, start to drag, do my measurement from, so I click on the screen, I'll click there, and this time I'm going to click the other plane, that plane there. Notice it's actually a totally different number. The other one was like 25. This one's 24. So I'll say negative, and I'll do my 0.5 for the height. Okay? So that's how you're able to get exact angles to do this. Okay? Okay. Now I could do the rest. I'll just do those really quick so we can. Oops, that was a measure. I want to do the flange command. So I'll do that. Instead of having to measure, I'm just going to come in here and say minus the 24 and the 0.5. But I do need to make sure the back one, it's at a slight angle. If I look at it from the side, you can see it's at an ever so slight angle. So I'm going to have to measure this one. Okay, so I could come in here, do my flange, start to drag, measure one more time. I'll say measure this flat face against that flat face. It's only about 1 degree, 1.33 degrees. So I'm going to say minus 1. And let's do the 0.5. Okay. Okay, so now I have this particular shape. One thing that I typically do is I'm working with sheet metal parts, and I should have done this as I was going around, but I like to unfold every few steps just to make sure that this part is still manufacturable. And it looks like it is. So it looks like we're good there. Every once in a while you'll do something and it'll cause sheet metal to fail and it won't unfold. Maybe you kind of destroyed a bend relief or something like that using an extrude command or something. So I like to unfold every so often just to make sure that it's still a valid sheet metal part. Okay. Okay. So that's basically the extent of this. Now, what's kind of neat is I could come back and make changes. So for example, this plane I put way up high, I said was 5 inches. Let's move it down to like 3 inches. Say okay, and hopefully that'll update. And sure enough, you can see that it did. Okay, so I could come back and make changes, for example, to my sketch. Let me turn on that other sketch so I can kind of see it. I could move this circle, to the center here. Finish my sketch. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but in this case you can see sure enough it did. It really kind of depends on how you built it. And so I can come back and make changes to this, and all of that upfront work that I did, all of these lofts that I did still work, which is really kind of cool. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you another tip. If you didn't know this, I have all of these lofts. In fact, I'll even select these stitches. I could right click on this and say create group. And what that's going to do is really simplify my timeline. So now you can see that there's like these three little icons, and if I hover over that, you can see there's all my lofts inside that group. So same thing with here, I could group together all of my flanges if I wanted to. I can even come in and rename those if I wanted to rename that group. So I could call it tabs or something. And now if I hover over that, you'll see that it's labeled tabs. So kind of a cool way to simplify your timeline. Okay. So I just glanced over really quick. I saw Ron said, hey, you could probably like 3D print this, use it as a fan shroud or something like that for your 3D printer. Now notice the angles changed because I changed the size, so I would have to go back and remeasure, but that's what's really cool about, let me find that flange, it's this guy right here. So all I have to do is say measure the angled face with the flat face and give me the difference of that, and now it's straight up and down again. So that's what I love about parametric design. Okay, again, I'm not saying this is how you would design HVAC equipment. Honestly, I wish we had some functionality in our sheet metal that did these folds for you, and maybe that'll be down the road on the roadmap for sheet metal. What I was showing here is just a process. Like if you had to do something like this, there is a way. It's not the fastest way, but there is a method to doing this, and that's why I really wanted to show this. Hopefully you learned some tips and tricks with this. I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to glance at the chat. I apologize, Wayne wasn't able to join in, so I was going solo today. Again, make sure you watch his live stream next week. And then a quick review will be off for a couple weeks. For those observant ones of you, you'll notice I have a new toy in the background. I'm actually going to be doing a review of this printer and maybe how I would go from a Fusion design part right to the printer. Because I know we get a lot of questions about, you know, I bring in an STL and it's the wrong size and all kind of stuff. So I'm probably going to do a little series on 3D printing. So Ron, hopefully that helps you out there. So let me glance at the chat really quick. You guys can stare at me. I don't know if there was anything glaring. And I don't want to waste your guys' time. What I'll probably do is go through the chat, and if there was any questions in there, if it is really important, put it into the comments of the video once the video is out on YouTube, and I try and respond to all of those comments in the underneath the video. So if you have a question about this particular process, please feel free to post it out there. Just wanted to say thank you. See you on future live streams, and remember, with Fusion 360 you can make anything. Thank you.